Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. In this episode, we talk about Babylon. Babylon is a revolution, a cosmopolitan revolution. There had been nothing like Babylon up to this point. And you can see this in the ancient writings. If you know your Old Testament, you know there's the Tower of Babel story. You know that Babylon pops up again and again and again in Jewish literature. And it's like kind of how Americans think of Las Vegas. It's kind of awesome that something so big is out there, but it's also terrifying that something so big and sinful and full of money and full of different people that is out there. People simply hadn't seen anything like Babylon. And so we're going to talk about Babylon, and we're going to talk about the most important king of Babylon, Hammurabi, who wasn't the first king. He was, I believe, the sixth king of Babylon, but he's going to leave the most enduring historical testaments. So, why Babylon? Of all the places, why do we get this revolution in Babylon? And the answer is because it's convenient. There has been a major city where Babylon is for as long as cities have been where Babylon is. It's Babylon, it's Ctesiphon, it's Baghdad. Why? Because it is halfway up and down the Euphrates and the Tigris. It is also where those two rivers come closest. In the ancient world, they met at the very, very bottom. But for most of recorded history, they didn't. They don't. They flow separately into the Persian Gulf. But they come near each other where Babylon is. And it makes sense. Why go all the way up the river when you could go halfway and sell your goods? Oh, you want to meet somebody on the upper Tigris? Hey, let's meet at Babylon. They come down half the river, you go up half the river, boom, and you meet. And so this explains why Babylon will be a huge city, because it's an economic city, which is new. Rather than a city based upon farmers and that walled circle of protection, this is a city about economic output. And it's cosmopolitan. What does that mean? Well, if you break it down into its parts, cosmo, pol, and ition, it's Greek, and it means a city of the universe, a universal city. So who's living there? Everybody's living there. Everybody's going to go there. It's New York. It's London. There are very few cosmopolitan cities anywhere on Earth at any particular time. Most cities, Philadelphia, Liverpool, are metropolitan cities. Most of the people who live in the city live in the area of the city. And thus it's much smaller. So Babylon had 250,000 people in it, while a typical Mesopotamian city had 10,000 people in it. So we're talking a city 25 times the size when you go there, which explains why in the Old Testament stories, the Hebrews are impressed and horrified at the same time. And you can see why you get stories like the Tower of Babel. The people go to Babylon. They do their trade. They come back from Babylon. And what's the first question? It's just like the first question you get from your friends when you go to Vegas. What was it like? Was it as crazy as I heard? And the answer is, oh my God, they have buildings that are big. How big? So big they reach up into the sky and knock on God's front door. And thus your Tower of Babel. They speak so many languages. How many languages do they speak? A babel of languages. It's unbelievable. How can they even understand each other? Remember, in Jerusalem, in the Hebrew territory, everybody speaks Hebrew. In Babylon, almost nobody speaks Hebrew. Only Hebrews speak Hebrew, and they're surrounded by a sea of other languages. And so It's easy to see why that is both impressive but also horrifying. How do these people live? Oh, they drink, they have sex, they do all kinds of different things than we do. So the advantages of Babylon is its very size. It is a vortex of people and stuff. It sucks. Its size sucks people in. 250,000 people live in Babylon, which means those 250,000 people have to eat, because nobody who lives in a city is a farmer. Which means the farmers outside of Babylon and all throughout Mesopotamia can sell food to Babylon. It's going to suck in food from farmers all throughout the Middle East. Now, those people need to make money in order to buy food. So they have to make stuff. They have to make horseshoes, and they have to make hammers, and they have to make stuff people need. And they have to sell that stuff. And they have to sell that stuff as much and as far as they can. So it sucks in food. It sucks in people. And it exports stuff in order to make money. And so you get this vortex. And it sucks in people. Why does it suck in people? Because if you want to get away from your boring city, where everybody knows your name, you can go to Babylon. You want to start over, you go to Babylon. You want to get away from the ex-boyfriend and ex-girlfriend that you see all the time in town who's married somebody else, you go to Babylon. You can always, just like in New York, start over. You could be whatever you want in Babylon. And so it sucks in people, it sucks in raw materials, and it exports stuff to make trade, to make money. The result of this is diversity, which is an advantage. Why? Because it's going to suck in all these people and all their ideas, their knowledge, their technology. And we see this erupt. Because if you're in Babylon and you're a blacksmith and you make horseshoes, right? You, in your little dinky town, you were the best horseshoe maker. So you're like, I'm going to make more money. I'm going to go to Babylon. I am awesome. So you go to Babylon. And not only are you not automatically the best horseshoe maker in Babylon, there are 30 other horseshoe makers who are all competing with each other to be the best. And so you look at what they do and you're blown away, because if you want to make it in Babylon, it's what they say about New York. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. It's all sharp elbows. No one cares about the newbie, the noob who comes in thinking they're great. Turns out you were the best player in the minor leagues, and now you're in the majors, and you can't hit that 95-mile-an-hour curveball unless you change. And so you see somebody making horseshoes, and it's awesome, and it blows your mind how good they are and what their new techniques are. And you say, can you teach me how to do that? And they say, sure, pay me. Because no one does anything for free. You'll be my apprentice. You'll help me. You'll pay me. I'll teach you. And they say, great. So I'm going to spend money now to make money in the future, just like students are doing forevermore. And so what we get is bronze tools, which are better than wood, better than stone, more flexible. It's copper plus tin, and you make bronze. So suddenly farmers and workers can be more productive. You get the lunar calendar. This comes out of the religion. Like, when are the feasts? When should you harvest? I don't know. How do we tell time? I don't know. And then they look up at the moon and they say, the moon. The moon goes through a 29-day cycle. So we'll count moons. From full moon to new moon, back to full moon. And we'll count that. Because it's standard. It is going to be, it doesn't change. You just go with it. And suddenly now, people are better at their jobs, especially farmers. Why? Because before, they had to guess, when will spring planting happen? I don't know. Because I'm worried if I plant too early and snows come, I kill all my seeds. But if I plant too late, I won't have time to harvest before the winter comes. So I got to get it right. And in comes a lunar calendar set that says, look, start planting 3 new moons after the winter harvest. And you say, okay, that should more or less, not totally, but more or less, if the God's willing, remember we talked about the gods, that should make it more productive. That should give me the right idea of time. And so the lunar calendar invents time, especially for farmers. And they're more effective because now they know when to plant, they know when to harvest, and they get it right, and they make more money. We get math, and we get time. Babylonian math was based on 60. And notice how we use time. 60 minutes, 60 seconds. So we get time. They invented time. And so that spreads because when people go and they leave Babylon and they retire and they go back to some little dinky town and they're like, oh, you guys aren't using a lunar calendar? Here, let me show you. Oh, you don't have 60 seconds in a minute? Let me show you. And boom. It spreads. This knowledge spreads. You get stories because people drink. And they want to tell stories. And they're storytellers. And the oldest story we have is Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh has 2 components to it. The first is, what are the aspects of a good king? Because Gilgamesh is a bad king when he starts. It starts, and the people are lamenting. They're like, oh, what did we do to deserve a Gilgamesh? He treats us so badly. And then Gilgamesh learns how to be a better king. How to be a better prince. Mostly because the gods send him a foil who becomes his best friend. A nemesis who becomes a friend. To show him, I could be better. I could have been more like him. The second thing is, what is the meaning of life? The greatest question philosophy has ever had. Because in Gilgamesh, there is the flood story. 1,000, 2,000 years before Noah, there is a flood story that wipes out the earth. And Gilgamesh survives. And he is traumatized. And he asks the question, why? Why did I die? Why did I live when everyone else died? And what is the meaning of this? If we die, why does life matter? And his answer ultimately is an answer that many the Greeks will use, that the Romans will use, which is you leave behind stories. You leave behind the great tales that people tell you. Now, Gilgamesh can leave behind. He's a prince. He's a hero. The gods like him. He can leave behind a great story that lots of people will talk about. Most people don't have that. Most people won't go through life having their great deeds recounted by bards and musicians. But they can have children. And those children will remember you and pass down the story of what dad and mom were like to their children. And their children will tell stories about grandma. You don't remember grandma, but let me tell you about grandma. And so your story gets passed down through children. So Gilgamesh has 2 parts. What does it mean to be a king? A good king, a good prince. But also, what is the importance of life for ordinary people? And ultimately it is to live a good life that your children and grandchildren will remember and speak fondly of you. And that story is everywhere. You cannot go and dig in the Middle East and not dig up Gilgamesh. It is everywhere. Everybody likes this story. And everyone will use it. The Hebrews use it. They read it and they listened to it and they said, oh my God, one of these dudes here, Gilgamesh, has survived the flood, and he's going around and he meets some people and he's like, you survived. How did you survive? Well, I built a big boat. Wow. And then, well, good luck. See you later. And the Hebrews will say, that guy with the boat, he's our guy. He's Noah. And they tell an entire story like Virgil does in the Aeneid. So Homer in the Iliad or the Odyssey or both talks about Aeneas, a Trojan. And he just mentioned him. And Aeneas fights and does well and doesn't die. And Virgil, 1,000 years later, says, that guy, I'm going to tell his story. He's going to become a Roman. I'm going to tell his story. Well, that's what the Hebrews did to Gilgamesh. They don't use Gilgamesh. They use a secondary character in the Gilgamesh story and say, that's Noah. See, we're a part of this story too. And let's tell you that story. And finally, the diversity is the anonymous, the anonymity of the big city. You can start over. You can always go to Babylon and start over. Nobody knows who you are. You don't have a reputation. There are too many people. And we see that story over and over again. It's the story, the founding story of Mad Men TV show. It's Dick Whittington in London. It's the idea that you can go and start over in the city. Now, there are problems with Babylon, and the problem is diversity. There's too many languages. How do these people deal with each other? How do they speak to each other? There's too many laws and customs. Everybody thinks they have the right customs. And you go, well, everyone should just do their own thing. Yeah, but let me ask you a question. What should be the official day of rest? What day should businesses be closed? Well, Muslims say it's Friday. Jews say it's Saturday. And Christians say it's Sunday. Who's right? And that's the question. That's the problem. Everyone thinks they're right. And so when somebody else says, no, I'm right, you're wrong. Now put 250,000 people all screaming at each other that they're right and you're wrong. And what do you have? You have social chaos. Some people don't eat pig. What if the people right next door are slaughtering pigs? Spilling the blood into the street as a sewer, as you would in the ancient world. Well, you're like, wait, you're polluting the street. That's crazy. And they're like, what do you mean? It's just a pig. It's nothing. It's food. Who's right and who's wrong? And that gets a big shrug. Nobody knows. Everybody thinks they're right and they think everybody else is wrong. And this is the core of that can break apart a city, break apart a cosmopolitan city, that they don't agree on anything. And so what you could end up with is war and civil war and the place imploding, a social conflict. The third thing is you're anonymous. Now, I talked about how being anonymous and starting over is a great thing, but you're anonymous. Nobody knows who you are. There's no protections. There's no help. People are going to steal from you. Why? Because they don't care about you. People are going to lie to you. Why? Because they don't care about you. They don't know you. In the small town, everybody knows each other. And that sucks if you have a bad reputation. But the other thing in a small town is everybody knows you. So when you walk into the bar and you say, can I have a drink? And they say, do you have any money? Oh, and you go, dude, it's me. They say, of course, yes, no problem. I know, you get paid on Friday. I know you're good for it. Right? You have a problem. Your mom is sick and you have to go to work. You can knock on your neighbor's house and be like, hey, can your daughter come over and just watch my mom for a couple of days? You know, just take care of her. I'll pay you. And they'd say, of course, we're neighbors. We wouldn't betray you. We wouldn't lie to you. We are all in this together. But in the city, in the cosmopolitan city, you don't have any of that. You might run into people from your old town. You might hang out with people who speak your same language. And those are ghettos. Ghetto. Those are ghettos where people of like cultures congregate. Why? Why do Chinese people congregate in Chinatown? Because they have something in common that they don't have with the other people around them. So they congregate for protection. But you have no friends. You may have no protection. And so there's rampant crime and especially theft. The number one crime in Babylon is theft. Why? Because nobody knows each other. Think about it. You're in class, sitting next to somebody. 10 weeks go by. You see them every Tuesday and Thursday. You are talking to them. You're sharing gum and all that. That person stands up to leave class and leaves a $20 bill in the seat. Do you take that $20 bill? Or do you get that person's attention and say, oh, you dropped $20? I'd imagine after 10 weeks, 20 classes with each other, you'd say, wait, Debbie, you dropped $20. And they'd say, oh, thank you. But what happens if you didn't see that $20 and they got up and you got up and everyone got up? And then another class comes in an hour later and sits down in that seat. Is that person going to find Debbie and give back the $20? No. They're going to take it. They're going to pick it up. They're going to put it in their pocket. Why? Because they don't know whose money it is. And they don't care about the person. Oh, they're out $20. Sucks to be them. Good for me. It's not personal. It's that they don't know who it is. They have no ability to find that person. And so why should I care? It's mine now. Thank you. And that's because you're anonymous. That's because you don't have those connections. So what is Hammurabi's solution? It's a law code. It is the first written down law code in history. Hammurabi's code. And you know it. You know it in your gut. You know it in your core being. Because you've heard the phrase, it is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Except it's not. It's more complicated than that. And that is very important. If you on a test tell me it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, I'm going to have to say it's wrong because that's not Hammurabi's code. That is the Hebrew take on it, the Jewish remix of it. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So what is Hammurabi's code? It is a law code that uses math. Now, if you went to Hammurabi and said, look, you have a mathematical formula figuring out your laws, he would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. But it really uses math. Who you are multiplied by what you did divided by who you did it to. What does that mean? It means who you are. Are you a nobleman? Are you a citizen? Are you a slave? Multiplied by what you did. The worse the crime, the worse the punishment's going to be. Divided by who you did it to. Did you do your crime to a nobleman, a citizen, or a slave? And so you get an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth if you are of the same social status. What does that mean? That means if a nobleman, we're at a bar, we're watching the World Cup, we're watching basketball, and I'm into LeBron, and I'm with another nobleman who's into Steph Curry, or my Swedes are playing England, and we're two noblemen having a good time, and we're joshing each other, and you know what? I'm winning, and he gets upset, and he goes to punch me, and he knocks out one of my eyes. What does that mean? I get to knock out one of his eyes. Which eye? The same eye he hit on me. Because it's reciprocal. He is a nobleman. I am a nobleman. And so we're equal. So thus the punishment is equal. But what if he goes to hit me and my loyal slave stands in the way, jumps to protect me and hits my slave in the eye? Is this guy going to lose an eye? This nobleman? No, he's a nobleman. And my guy is only a slave. But, and this is important, he can't get away with it either. He did do a crime. He has to be punished. So how do you punish a nobleman who is worth much more than a slave? Well, the answer is a nobleman has money, so he's got to pay. So you knock out an eye of my slave. I now can't sell my slave for the same amount of money. His worth is now less. He can't do the same amount of work. So you got to pay. And so he pays $100 per eye, let's just say. What if he swings at me, misses, and knocks out the eye of a regular old farmer citizen sitting behind me? Well, that guy is worth more than a slave, but he's not worth as much as a citizen. And so what is the answer? $200 per eye. Again, the nobleman's not losing an eye, but he is being punished. Now, let's flip that. What if we're joshing and my slave gets upset for me to protect me and hits this nobleman in the face and knocks out a tooth? What's going to happen? Well, my slave is executed. My slave dies. Why? Because in a city of 250,000 people, where the rich are only the top 2%, you cannot let slaves get away with hurting rich people. They're too important. They're too important to the army, and we'll talk about how, but they're too important to the economy. So my slave is out. My slave is taken out back and executed. Boom. But what if my slave beats up, knocks 2 teeth out of his slave's mouth? Well, then my slave loses 2 teeth. Why? Well, because they're both slaves. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth if you are of the same social status. So a slave hurting a slave gets the same punishment. A nobleman hurting a nobleman gets the same punishment. But a slave hurting a nobleman gets a worse punishment. And a nobleman hurting a slave gets a less harsh punishment. What are the advantages of this situation? First, the king as protector. The king steps in and says, I make the laws. I will protect you. In fact, in Hammurabi's prelude, he says so. And this is the gain of legitimacy. Now, notice this is new. This is a new form of legitimacy. Legitimacy before was protecting you from nomads. We're going to build walls. Now legitimacy is I am going to keep the peace. I'm going to protect people from each other. I'm going to protect the poor from the rich and the rich from the poor. 2, it ends arguments. You don't get Romeo and Juliet. See, Romeo and Juliet starts with ancient grudge makes new mutiny. The idea is the Capulets and the Montagues have been fighting for so long, nobody remembers what started the fight. And this is what the law is trying to stop. You knocked out my teeth, I'm knocking out the same teeth, and then it's done. You come after me again, you're breaking the law. I go and search for more, I'm breaking the law. I'm in the wrong. So it brings peace, it ends arguments. 3, it protects the weak from the strong. For the first time, rich people don't have penalties. Now, remember, you may say, well, it's not equal. There is no equality. There is none. Until we reach the Greeks, the word equal doesn't even exist in these languages. There is no equality. Nobody expects there to be equality. They look at the rich people and say they are better. They should be treated better. But for the first time, they can't get away with it. See, before, this is how the law works. I'm a rich dude, and I've got a son who's a jerk. And that son is walking by and he sees a pig. Now, my son is a nobleman, as I'm a nobleman, so he's carrying a sword. And what does he do? He kills that pig. And he giggles. Well, what about the farmer who owns that pig? That farmer is now out $500. The worth of that pig. He can't sell the live pig. And if it was a sow, he can't make new pigs. So he's losing money on this. So what would he do? Well, he'd come up to me and knock on my door and say, you owe me $500, your son killed my pig. And my bodyguards who opened the door would say, make us, and then slam the door in his face. And what would he do? He has no army. He has no protection. He's got nothing. If he harasses us, I send my bodyguards there to send them a message. The first time is a knock and say, stop it. The second time, we destroy some stuff. And the third time, we take it out on him if he keeps complaining. So weak people, the poor, had no protection from the weak. For the first time, now the poor can come to the king, can come to a judge who represents the king and point at the law and say, Law 182 says if you destroy property, you have to pay the value of that property. And the judge looks at it and then looks at the nobleman and says, all right, you owe him. You have to give him a pig. No, you don't have to give him a pig. You have to pay him $500. Because if you had to give him a pig, that would be their equal. So you pay $500, and the poor guy goes, yeah, but I could have gotten $1,000 from that pig. And like, well, you get $500. And the poor guy says, all right, at least that's something. And the rich guy goes, all right, here. He writes a check. Here's $500. Because if he doesn't do it, then the king says, who are you? I made the law, and who are you to break it? Who are you to flout my law? And the king, remember, has legitimacy. So he gets the legitimacy from protecting poor people, but he also protects the rich. And this is incredibly important. It protects the rich from the poor. And you say, well, why did the rich need protection? From revolution. The rich are 2%. In a city of 250,000, that's nothing. And the poor people look at the rich people and say, look at all the stuff they have. Do you know what we could do? Murder them. We could just walk up and murder them and take their stuff. There's not enough of them to stop us. Think the French Revolution. Think the Russian Revolution. And so what this does is make laws that treat the rich better than the poor, which the rich always like, but also limits the ability of the poor to hurt the rich. So it protects the weak from the strong, but it also protects the strong, which are a tiny percentage, from the massive amounts of the poor. So it's really an act of genius that does this. This is so, and you see it. It's in the Old Testament, right? Everybody will use this. Everyone will use some form of Hammurabi's law. In fact, even ISIS today, in the 21st century, will say, you know what kind of law we should have? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth law. And you're like, why? The Greeks invented juries. The Romans invented jurisprudence. So we've gone beyond that. We don't have to go back. But in 2000 BC, this was considered the fairest law you can have. And it really isn't replaced until the Romans come along with Roman jurisprudence, which treats everyone equally because of the 12 tables. And we'll talk about that when we get to the Romans. Okay, how are women treated? Well, women are not citizens. They don't produce as much food. They don't produce as much economic output. So they're not citizens. But there's a problem with women. Women are a problem in this early law code. Why? Because it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And women do stuff wrong. And nobody looks at that and says, I want to punish women the same way as we punish men. We still don't. You look at how long men are put away for, and then look at how long women go to prison for the same exact crime. They are not the same. They are not equal. We don't, even now in the 21st century, we don't want to punish women the same way we punish men. And they didn't want to do it then. But that leaves a legitimate problem. How do we treat them? Well, the first thing is we can't treat them as citizens, because then the law would have to apply to them equally. But then how do we treat them? And there's an answer. And it's an answer we all live with. And that is to treat them as children. Not property. Women are never property unless they're slaves, and that is a completely different category. But women are not property because you can't sell your wife. You can't barter off your wife. You can't even abuse your wife. And I know people are going to snicker and whatnot, but you can't. Why? Why can't I beat my wife in ancient Babylon? Because she has brothers. Because she has a father. Because what is going to happen? She is going to go to my in-laws with a black eye. And they're going to ask, why? What happened? And she's going to say, I don't know. He got angry. And then what happens? 2 a.m. I get a knock on the door. And it's my brothers-in-law. And they say, hey, Billy, we're going out for a drink. And we were in the neighborhood. Why don't you come with us? And if you have ever seen The Godfather, you know what happens. I can't say no. They're my brothers-in-law. And I know I'm now in the back seat, and there's cannolis, and bad things are going to happen. And they're going to beat the snot out of me. And then they're going to drop me off an hour later with the, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Now, women who have no protection, slaves, prostitutes, who have no family, who have no connections, they are treated as property. They have no protections. They have problems. But the ordinary, rich, middle class, even poor married woman does have protections. They're social protections. They're not legal protections necessarily. But they are the family enforcement. So we're going to treat women legally as children. Why? Because children do stuff that is wrong all the time. Children are giant rule breakers. And yet we don't throw them in jail. We don't want to throw them in jail. We laugh and go, oh, it's okay. You know, you find me a 4 or 5-year-old who hasn't stolen candy from a Wawa. You know how Wawa has the high counters, but it has all that candy underneath there, but the person working the cashier can't look down? A 4-year-old looks at that and goes, I'll take a peanut chew. And then you walk out and you're halfway home, and then it's like, hey, I'm eating a peanut chew. And you're like, where'd you get the peanut chew from? And it's like, oh, I got it at the store. Totally shoplifted. Nobody is throwing that kid in jail. Maybe you go back and you say, I'm sorry, my kid took this. Here, let me give you money, or let's put it back, right? Maybe. But usually you say, nah, it's okay. And even if you do that, the guy who's working, the manager at the Wawa, is not going to say, I'm calling the cops on you. Like, if the cops showed up, they'd be like, this is insane. Not going to arrest the kid. And so we treat Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi, treats women as children. They're not responsible for their actions. Yes, they did something bad, but they're not responsible. It's the husband who will be held responsible. And you get this question: why did you let your wife X go to the park, do this, have that? Women in Saudi Arabia, right? They now can drive. All right. But let's say before there were all the prescriptions, she goes out for a drive and she gets in a car accident. They arrest her. They're not going to put her in prison. They're not going to beat her. They bring her back to the home. They knock on the door. I open it and they're like, is this your wife? And I say, yeah. And they're like, why did you let her drive and get into an accident? And I'm like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Because I was a weak man who let my wife do something that got her in trouble. But because she's a child, it gets me in trouble. I'm responsible for it. So do women have no value? No, they have an immense value. And we see this in how the law treats virginity. women have possession of their body. Their virginity has a actual gold value, a monetary value. And men who try to steal it, men who seduce, men who lie, men who are like, hey, baby, I love you. I'm going to marry you one day, but can I get a down payment? Those guys will be punished. People who seduce a wife. The wife is blameless. It's the man's responsibility. So if you sleep with a married woman, you're at fault, gentlemen. How could she resist? The husband is in trouble because he allowed his wife in the situation where she could be seduced. But a woman has possession of her body, just like she does in nomadic society. She has possession. Rape is illegal. Seduction is illegal. Anything that takes away a woman's virginity or her sexual piety. So women continue to have possession of their body. Now, slaves don't. Remember that. But slaves are machines. Slaves are always something different. But women, citizen, regular working class women, and up, middle class, rich women still have possession of their bodies. So what are they going to do in this society? And that is wife and mother. That job is now a protected position. What do you mean? Don't all women become wives and mothers? Yeah, maybe. 95% may. But the law sanctifies it. The law says a woman has a right to become a wife and a mother. That's a big deal. Because one, it means as a dad, you have to find a good husband for your daughter. A good companion. You just can't sell her off. She's not a piece of property. She has a right to be a wife and a right to be a certain kind of wife of a certain standard of living. We do the same thing in our divorce, where you pay alimony. The idea is even a wife shouldn't now be left in poverty just because her and her husband broke up. And so she has a right to be a wife. So as fathers, I have to do this for my daughters, or I'm in trouble. As husbands, I have to treat my wife as a wife, not as a slave, not as an object. A wife gets a definition of a certain kind of lifestyle. And then she's allowed to become a mother. So what does that mean? What do you mean she has to be a mom? That means I, as a husband, have to have sex with my wife. And you may laugh and go, ha, why wouldn't you have sex with your wife? But what if I'm a merchant? And I'm like, honey, I got to go up to Syria. It's going to be 2 years. I'm going to be gone for 2 years. I might die of malaria. Well, can I go? The answer is no. I can't go. Oh, the king has an army. Well, he's going to go off and fight the king of Elam. Can I join? No. Why? Because my wife, my childless wife, has a right to become a mom. And that's my duty. I have to do that for her as a man. That is a man's responsibility, is to help my wife become a mother. If I do not do that, if I disappear for 2 years up to Assyria, my wife has every right to divorce me. And she'll go to the judge and say, he's gone. I can't. I have no children. I can't become a mom. And the judge will say, well, that's a loser. That guy's a jerk. You're right. You're divorced. He's got to pay you 100 gold pieces, and you can marry whoever you want. You're totally blameless. Here's the script. Here you go. So these positions become protected. Now, what's the downside? That sounds great, but the downside is there's no protections for any other jobs. You can only be a wife and a mother. There's no other things. There's no protections for owning businesses. There's no protections for being a Wonder Woman female Amazon warrior. Your life as a woman is now defined in the box of wife and mother. And what if you're bad at that? If you're great and you're on Etsy and you're on Instagram showing off your awesome mothering skills, that's great. But what if you're bad at being a wife and a mother? What if you didn't want to be a wife and a mother? What if you wanted to be something else? You can't. You're stuck. If you try to be something else, you aren't protected by the law. As a wife and a mother, you're protected. And you have rights. And you have defense. But as a female soldier, pretending like Mulan, you don't. You have no protections. The law doesn't cover you. So the advantage of the system is women gain protection and privileges. They get the rights over their body. They get protected status as wives and mothers. They get a role in society that is defined. The disadvantage is the lack of agency. They are not citizens. They are children. They are not equal to their husbands. They are not partners. And you lose your independence because you're not children. Because you're not children. Because you are children. You lose your independence. You have to have a man be responsible for you. A husband, a father, if dad dies, a brother. There's a man who's there to make legal decisions for you, who is responsible for you and is held responsible for you. So the advantage is you get protections and privileges. The disadvantage is you lose your independence and your ability to act. All right, in our next episode, we're going to talk about the chariot revolution and how chariots, the super weapon of their day, changed how countries dealt with each other.